Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Youth Trade Summit on Gender. My name is Anouchka Bogossian, and I'm the head of the Trade and Gender Unit here at the WTO. And before I open the summit, I would like to congratulate you, all the 56 young professionals that have been nominated by their governments or their research institutions to attend this event, and more importantly, to contribute to it. It is really a real pleasure to see you all today, and I'm looking forward to engaging with you throughout the next 2 days. All of you represent a region in the world and have obviously a different perspective on the matter of trade and gender, which will no doubt enrich our discussions. The summit is your platform to build or expand on your knowledge on trade and gender equality. It is your platform to exchange with policymakers, WTO ambassadors, and senior experts from academia and international organizations. And during the next 2 days, we will work together to ensure that this platform serves you the best way possible. The summit is also about maximizing your voices, the voices of the next generation, on how to make trade work for women, so that all of us can also learn from you. I wish you all a great event, and I will now give the floor to Nadine Mahmoud from the Trade and Investment Advocacy Fund and Cowater International to lift the curtain on the Youth Trade Summit on Gender. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and aspiring leaders of tomorrow. It is a pleasure to be here with you today as we embark on this journey of innovation, collaboration, and dialogue at the World Trade Organization Youth Trade Summit on Gender. The World Trade Organization has for years been at the forefront of shaping global trade and economic policies, and it's truly inspiring to see future leaders come together to explore the dynamics of inclusive international trade while sharing perspectives and building bridges of understanding of pressing trade, gender, and social inclusion issues. This year's summit is particularly special as it occurs in the context of a rapidly changing global landscape. The world is facing unprecedented challenges, from the ongoing health crisis to climate change, to persistent economic and developmental challenges. These issues have only heightened the urgency of holistic international cooperation and collective problem solving, whilst also highlighting the immense value of inclusive and gender equitable trade. For these reasons, I'm delighted to be here today representing the Trade and Investment Advocacy Fund, TAF2+, a UK aid-funded program implemented by Cowater International that is dedicated to supporting trade and investment capacity building efforts in developing countries. As part of our Gender and Trade grant on our JEDC Knowledge Series, we've been actively involved in supporting research on the intersection of gender equality, social inclusion, trade, and investment. Last year, we launched a paper by Dr. Amrita Bari focusing on disability inclusion within trade agreements, a vital yet under-researched topic. This study explores barriers that persons with disabilities face in participating in trade opportunities for economic growth that explicitly include them from the outset. We are continuing to support Dr. Bari in this important research area with a second paper due to be launched in the coming months. Now moving on to youth, the focus of the summit, who continue to represent the majority in middle and low-income countries, for instance, across Africa, where it is estimated that they account for around 60% of the population. Today, I'm particularly proud to launch a new paper as part of our TAF2 Gender and Trade work, exploring the critical role youth play in ensuring gender equitable and inclusive trade. This study is quite unique to others as it followed a collaborative research approach which emphasized recruiting 3 youth delegates mentored by a senior researcher, Nadia, in order to amplify youth voices and more closely focus on their perspectives. As will be further detailed in just a moment by the researchers here, This paper will explore the critical involvement the young women and men play in trade as entrepreneurs, skilled workers, cross-border traders, and consumers. It will also highlight that their indispensable roles as young women and men encounter various obstacles which hinder their active participation in trade. I want to extend my gratitude to the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, the FCDO, for their invaluable support without which the study would have not been possible. Their commitment to fostering research that contributes to understanding trade, gender equality, and social inclusion dynamics has been instrumental in bringing this paper to fruition. I also wish to thank the WTO Working Group on Trade and Gender and the WTO Gender Research Hub for the critical guidance and support and for the unique opportunity to present this paper with you all today. I must also thank the TAF2 team who provided invaluable support in peer reviewing the study, and specifically to Caitlin Poole, the JETSI specialist who first brought this idea's paper to life. Most of all, I would like to thank Nadia, Maurice, Modesta, Regina for all their efforts and hard work put into this paper. I hope this study can be a guiding beacon throughout our discussions this summit, inspiring us all to collectively shape a world where trade transcends business and becomes a force for sustainable, inclusive development, ensuring that everyone, regardless of age, gender, or disability, enjoys the opportunities and benefits it presents. I will now pass over to the authors of this study for them to elaborate further on some of our findings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadine. And we didn't also get to thank you for all your valuable guidance and input into this paper. I'm Nadia. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Because we haven't started the official program yet, we're hoping this can be still part of an interactive session. So we'll try to be a little bit more interactive and engaging and not so formal. But we're happy to share the results of the paper that we've done with you today. And if we can have the slides on the screen, I'll just introduce a little bit, but we'll give the three researchers here a chance to give you more details on what we found. So you've already heard the background on how we came to look at this paper, and what we've tried to do here is to look at the role that youth can play in sustainable trade and inclusive trade, and we've looked from a number of angles. So we've tried to understand the roles that youth can play in trade. And then we've extended that to including what are the possible challenges that youth face, and now looking at some of the programs, policies, and provisions in trade agreements that might support inclusive participation of youth in trade. And of course, we've looked at the gender dimension throughout. So what we've started with is understanding that increased trade can create those opportunities for youth, especially considering high levels of youth unemployment that many regions are facing. And we also understand that trade will only be as effective as possible with the full participation of youth, and youth have some critical areas where they can contribute, especially in the new digital economy. And we also understand that both young women and young men play these roles, but they also face some critical challenges that could be structural, social, and capacity related. And so what we've tried to do with this paper, we recognize that there's a research gap in this area. There's not much evidence that we can find here. And so we first looked at those barriers and tried to understand what's causing them, what's driving them. And then we've done a review of some policies and programs that can address those barriers and made some recommendations on the basis of that. And so the methodology that we used, first we started with the conceptual framework. And here, because of the lack of data, what we've had to do is look at the various roles that youth can play in trade and try to extrapolate from that. And so we've looked, for example, at the angle of small business and what does it mean when you're a small business in terms of your ability to participate in trade. When we've also tried to propose a definition of what this can be, there's no universal concept of youth in trade. So we've tried to propose that. And we've mainstreamed gender throughout as I said, throughout the research. And we've looked at, you'll see some areas where we've looked particularly at the experience of young women, for example. And then we've done some quantitative analysis where we've looked at youth, particularly in their entrepreneurial roles and in their roles as employees. And so to do this analysis, we've used the World Bank Enterprise Surveys, as well as other literature review. And then finally, we've looked at lessons learned from the experience of policies and programs that are addressing some of those barriers, and then also trade agreements, which is a new area that we've looked at where youth considerations are increasingly being included, and what can we say from that perspective. And that's mostly based on secondary data. So we do have a limitation in that we were not able to do primary research. So it's mostly secondary research. And we didn't have an existing definition. So we've proposed one. And of course, the limitations, as I mentioned, on age disaggregated data. And then, as Nadine has already mentioned, we took this team approach to doing this paper where we have these 3 youth delegates who are wonderfully experienced in their various areas: Modesta in trade law and gender and inclusion issues. And we have Regina from the policy angle, who's a practitioner actually on the policy space. And we have Maryse, who has done most of the empirical analysis and is an expert on the economics side. So the team together has really been able to give color to these issues from these 3 various angles. So I'm very pleased to invite them to share the findings.
Morning, everyone. My name is Modesta, as Nadia has already said. So we set out on this research, and our first task was working within the concept of youth in trade. And our biggest hurdle, as Nadia has already stated, was finding a definition for youth in trade. So you hear a lot when you read policy papers, trade agreements, sometimes when you hear experts in policy or trade law talk, in relation to inclusivity issues that includes young people. We talk about young people in trade. But then when I got to finding a definition for the concept, we actually were quite surprised to find out that as it stands, no attempt had been made to define the concept of youth in trade. And so that was for our first task. So what we did was to look at most of the global and regional frameworks that speak to youth. And we found another surprise that most of the frameworks mostly spoke to youth and their social roles, primarily as children. And so when it comes to youth and their economic roles, the literature and then most of the international frameworks were also quite silent. So we looked at a number of international frameworks that speak to youth. And then so we looked at the UN habitats, the UN Secretariat itself, the UNESCO, ILO, the African Youth Charter. And then what we noticed was that usually, depending on the demographic, the economic or financial situation of which government or nation was using the context of youth, the age variation was quite different. So each nation or probably each trade agreement had different age gaps in referring to youth. And so that made the context and applicability of young people in trade quite problematic, because when you look at the African Youth Charter, for instance, it defines young people as people within the ages of 15 to 35 years. The UN Secretariat, UNESCO, ILO also places a range of 15 to 24. The UN Habitat Fund also says that young people are persons between the ages of 15 to 32 years. And so the problem is, so when we talk about young people, what age range are we talking about? Which people constitutes young people? Are we looking at 15 to 32 or going as far as 15 to 35 years, like the African Youth Charter? So that was one of the issues that we had to work with. So we had to narrow it down and come to, okay, so youth and their economic relations. And that was also another hurdle we needed to cross, because then most of the legal frameworks or regulations only spoke to youth in their economic role. Basically on regulations that deal with labor. So labor regulations were the only instances where we saw like youth being addressed in their economic roles. And so narrowing it down again, we decided to work with the ILO Minimum Age Convention because that sets a lower bound, or in simpler terms, a minimum age requirements for young people in the world of work. And so according to the ILO Minimum Labor Convention, for them, they decided to be a bit flexible and leave room for individual nations or governments to determine the upper age limit with flexibility as much as their national or domestic laws allow. And so they only set a lower bound, which is something sort of like a threshold on which all nations or governments can build based on their national or domestic laws. And so for them, they say that when you look at their agreements, the ILO Minimum Labor Convention gives a lower age bound of 16 years for young people in the line of work. But then it goes on to say that when you are looking at young people engaged in dangerous work, then they lift it up to 18 years. But quite unfortunately, they don't even define what constitutes dangerous work. And so in our attempt at proposing a definition for young people in trade, we decided to rely on this lower bound that has been set up by the ILO Minimum Age Convention. So we're relying on the 16 years as the minimum, and we are also giving flexibility to individual governments to propose or set up the upper age limits as their domestic laws will allow. So in our definition, just like I've said, we've set the lower age at 16 years and the upper age limit can go as high as the governments want to. And so in proposing the definition, we also looked at the literature and we saw guidance from the definition of women in trade that had been proposed or worked on by the joint WTO and World Bank. And so we decided that adopting and modifying the definition for women in trade, we propose that when we talk about the concept of youth in trade, we are referring to all young people here, and I'm sure most of us will fall into all the various categories that we have outlined. So we are looking at young people in their various roles as entrepreneurs, business owners, researchers, policymakers, decision makers, investors, consumers of trade-related products and services, among many others. And we adopted this definition because we believe that the definition acknowledges the need for trade law policies and initiatives to identify or reflect the various needs, the peculiar needs of young people in their various economic roles and trade and development. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Modesta. And I think it's really interesting, the background, the sort of story that you've given, and maybe it's important to let our colleagues here know that our research has mostly focused on youth in their entrepreneurial roles, so as entrepreneurs of small and medium-sized enterprises and small-scale traders, and also as employees and in terms of skilled workers and particularly digital skills. And so with that, I want to ask Maryse to give us some of the empirical results that we found on these two areas.
So after providing a definition for youth in trade, we look at the role of youth as entrepreneurs and employees. So for the role of youth as entrepreneurs, we found in this study that SMEs, or small and medium enterprises, play a crucial role in integrating youth in trade and the value chains. So the empirical evidence here shows that we have a positive relationship between the human capital level and youth skills, and the tendency of small and medium enterprises to internationalize and to integrate into international trade and the global value chains, contributing to inclusive growth and economic development. So by using the World Bank Enterprise Survey, we found that a significant majority of firms, almost 64% of firms, engaged in trade are SMEs, This graph, yes, highlights the important role of youth in international trade and underscores the need to empower and support small and medium enterprises for economic development and increased participation in trade and inclusive growth. However, the study reveals a gender disparity in entrepreneurial activity. So by using the same surveys, we found that only a small percentage of women owning or managing a firm participating in international trade. So this raises concerns about the sustainability and the competitiveness of these firms owned or managed by women. So this may increase the gender gap in the future, especially in entrepreneurship and international trade. And in the study also, we found that although youth theoretically stand to benefit from trade, the benefits of youth participation in trade do not occur automatically. So we found a lot of obstacles related to, for example, tariff and non-tariff measures that affect youth participation in trade and impose higher costs, especially on small and medium enterprises owned by young people, especially by women. Moreover, we found that informal cross-border trade, mainly dominated by women and young people, play a crucial role in local economies. However, they are subject to many obstacles and barriers that affect their performance, such as harassment and corruption. Finally, we found that barriers related to business environments, such as access to finance, electricity, and limitations on skilled labor force, especially in small and medium enterprises, hinder the participation of small and medium enterprises and their innovation. But the good news here is that when we looked at the obstacles and the barriers for firms that are integrating into global value chains, we found that the challenges or the obstacles are lower for those firms. So, for example, we found that access to finance and tax rate obstacles are decreasing for those types of firms that are integrating into global value chains. However, an educated workforce challenge become more critical. So from here, we can say that promoting training programs is very important in order to address these gaps in skills and to promote firms' operation and participation in global value chains. As for the role of youth as employees, here we found a very interesting outcome that SMEs in integrating into global value chains tend to employ a higher percentage or proportion of skilled, highly skilled compared to semi-skilled workers, which is not the case for large firms in global value chains that are that normally employ a higher percentage of semi-skilled and non-highly skilled workers. So here, these findings suggest that trading small and medium enterprises provide more opportunities for highly skilled youth. So they provide more jobs for youth. Yes. So thank you.
Thank you, Mais. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, some of the results that we found on this, and I think you've been able to show this positive relationship that we were talking about between entrepreneurship and youth and trade, and also the skill dimension, the opportunities for youth in trade, but some of the barriers that they're facing, and now we'll get to how we can address them. But before we get there, I want to ask you, if on the gender dimension, how does gender play a role in some of the patterns and the opportunities in the sectors that you found? And what do you think are the implications for productivity and stability in different aspects of trade in the global value chains? And you mentioned, for example, that women are less likely to own or manage trading companies, and this might affect the profitability of those companies because trading firms are more profitable. So if you can give us a little bit of the gender dimension on the sectors, that would be great.
So thank you, Nadia, for your question. So for the first part, for the sectoral dimension, here in the study, we found that sectors such as services, food, textile, and garments demonstrate a higher representation of women in ownership and management. And when we look at the number of employees, we found that women's employment is mainly prominent in the apparel manufacturing sector, as well as in textile and leather, especially in developing countries. In the context of global value chains, we found that firms engaged in global value chains tend to have a larger number of full-time permanent production workers and not seasonal or temporary production workers. So this means that global value chains are able to create a more stable and secured employment for women. And we found also a very interesting outcome that within these value chains, women's employment is mainly larger or dominated in indirect channels related to upstream suppliers and not direct channels directly related to exporters. So, so this means that okay, global value chains can create employment for women, but they are mainly dominated in less productive sectors, or yes, in less productive part or step of the value chain. Even so, we can say that trade can serve as a potential avenue for young women. And in order to address the skill problem or the productivity problem, it's important to focus on training and to give the priority to training that lowers the skill gap. So this discrepancy suggests that women working in trade-related activities may find themselves in lower productivity and less secure positions, but by addressing the skills shortage and this mismatch, we can solve this problem. Yes.
Thanks, Maryse. And that brings us very nicely to Regina, who will give us an overview of some of our findings on the effectiveness of policies and programs in addressing some of these challenges.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Nadia, for the chance that you have given me. And we did look at the policies and some of the programs on youth entrepreneurship, and we found out that these policies and programs that address youth entrepreneurship indeed help the youth to eliminate and also maybe to address some of the challenges that youth indeed face in entrepreneurship. And we also learned that having some of the programs and policies will encourage the youth to create their own products and also services, as we have already indicated that some of the programs promote youth entrepreneurship in value chains and cross-border connections to foster businesses. This will help these youth to come up with ideas on new products and services using the raw materials that are there in order to add value to the raw material and come up with an end product that can be used by the consumers and also be able to introduce something to the market. As we can also see some of the programs. For example, we have a program, the Youth Connect Africa Hub, whereby youth are able to connect with other from different countries in African continent. They are given the chance to have the summit like this one in Africa so that they can be able to share ideas and also discuss some of the ideas they can come up with the businesses and in their entrepreneurship era. So I understand that whenever we are moving from a country to another country, it's a kind of communicating and connecting and thereby creating the global market, whereby we'll be learning from our friends on how they are doing their businesses and also share their ideas so that we can come up with a good one. And some of the lessons we have also learned is that policies that look much into the building of digital skills and addressing the gender gap in the STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education is better be looked at much, because the study has found out that most of the most of the ladies, the girls' education really do not they do not have that much effort to put in science, technology, engineering, and maths, because one of the study which was conducted found out that about approximately 132 million girls do not attend school worldwide on the STEM education. It's unlike for boys, for men who are able to carry out the chance on them and also keenness on them in order to venture into digital, as we are already seeing the world is going digital. I think we should put our mind in education about the girl child and find the initiative and the incentives that will help the ladies and girls in order to involve themselves in these digital skills, and in order to address the gap that is there. And also with the digital world we are going, we have our youth who are fresh-minded and who have new ideas on the digital skills. I think it is better for us to come up with initiatives that will be able to put more ideas to them and sharpen their ideas that they already have, so that we can come up with a good results in order for us to continue going digital in this world. And we also learned that some of the policies, mostly the public-private partners, should encourage young entrepreneurs to have their own businesses, to start up their own businesses. But how can these young men start up their own businesses? Let these PPPs give trainings, but also meet these young people, but also maybe financially. They should always help them, because you can mentor a child, you can mentor a youth, but then if they are not financially stable, they do not have anything to start up their own businesses, they will not be able to continue with their ideas that they are having. They will not be able to continue what you mentored them. But whenever you provide them with financial and train them on how they can use whatever they have in order to start up their own businesses, they'll be able to employ other people, they'll be able to boost their own businesses, and hence will at least decrease the unemployment rate which is there among youth. And the youth also, they should be able to be integrated with professionals, because we understand that we are youth and we don't know about what was happening in the past, and also maybe we don't know the expertise in that area. Let youth and experts intermingle, so that they'll be able to learn from the experts in that field. Let's say the field of trade. Let the people who are experts in trade mentor youth who are interested in trade, so that they should be able to borrow what the professionals usually have, but also maybe bring their own fresh ideas to what they already have. In doing so, we'll be able to make young people to sharpen their ideas more, and also maybe to create a new product on the market, to have new ideas. So even though there are policies, there are programs and projects, some of the policies indeed they are successful, but then some of the policies they are not successful due to some challenges that we encountered. After going through these policies, we came across that some of the policies do not proceed or are not successful just because of the ineffective implementation and monitoring. We understand whenever we have a project, for us to get the good results that we want from the project, we need to monitor it every now and then. Whenever we are implementing it, we should be able to have time to monitor it from start, middle, up to the end. But then due to ineffectiveness of maybe not having much monitoring to the policies, to the projects, and to the initiatives, they do not use the results that they are tangible, or we can say that they give the impact what we wanted. So I think we should always look at this critically, because monitoring is the key to all. We also found out that some of the policies do not yield the success due to the inefficient financial resources allocated to youth policies. Yes, we can indeed have a good policy. We can indeed have a good youth project. But then if we are not allocating enough money to it, we cannot have whatever we wanted. We cannot implement it properly. So I think we should also be looking at the budget which we allocate to policies of youth in order to have the good results we want. Another point is the lack of youth engagement in the policy making process. Yeah, the policies can be made, yes, but if we do not involve youth in it, I don't think we can come up with a good policy that will address what youth needs. I think it's better for us to engage the youth, starting from the first thing we want to develop the policy up to the last stage of implementation in order to have the good results that we want, because the youth will be able to tell the ideas that they have, because they usually face the problems themselves. So if you engage them into the process, we'll be able to tell their own stories. They'll be able to give their own ideas on how we can solve it, and the policies and the projects will be able to also yield the good results that we want. Those are the some of the challenges that we looked at, and I understand that most of them are in the paper that we wrote. Thank you.
Thanks, Regina. And I'd like to ask Modesta to come up on the aspect of the global practice in a new area that we looked at, which is on trade agreements. As you're doing that, Regina, can you give us just an idea of from the policies that you reviewed and the processes that you reviewed, what are some of the steps that we can take to engage youth more in policymaking and decision making?
Okay, thank you, Nadia, for the wonderful question that you have asked me. Indeed, I think we need to create like advisory boards in order for youth to be able to get insight, as I've already said, that they can be engaged with the experts and everything in the field that they want. So advisory boards will be there to make the youth like know what they want and also sharpen their ideas. And also we can conduct surveys. We can conduct surveys and consultations. I understand we cannot reach to each and every youth like physically, but if you conduct surveys, we'll be able to use the technology that we have and put surveys on the maybe social media and everything, so that youth will be able to answer the questions that maybe we are asking, and we can also give the range of the ages, so that we'll be able to know, okay, who has answered the question and in what range, so that we can be able to say, okay, the youth responded in this way. And also consultations, we can be having maybe youth groups in our communities, starting from communities, regional and international, so that we'll be able to capture at least huge ideas like from different youth in different locations. I think doing so will be able to engage the youth in the process making, and also whenever they are making the policies, we'll collect the ideas and together and give them, okay, if you don't want a lot of youth to be involved, like maybe at the policy making, we'll take the answers for what we have found from the surveys, from the consultations, and be able to deliver them, okay, this is what youth are saying and how we can go about it.
Thanks so much, Regina. That's very practical, some very practical solutions that you've found. So now we'll go to Modesta on a new area that we looked at, which is youth and trade agreements. So
thank you, Nadia. So my colleague saddled me with what most people consider to be the boring aspects, trade agreements. And I know when lawyers speak, people don't like it so much because they say we complicate things. But this morning, for all your sakes, I promise I'm not going to complicate anything. I've just decided to simplify so that everybody can follow and then enjoy it. So like Nadia said, we looked at trade agreements. We looked at preferential trade agreement, bilateral free trade agreements, to look at young people's engagements in trade, because like we've been saying so far, from the days of the first free trade agreements, young people have been engaged in trade in their various economic roles, like we already discussed during the attempts at proposing a definition for trade. But then, in spite of this, quite unfortunately, we realized that integrating or making explicit provisions for young people's role in free trade or in trade agreements in general was quite new. And even though we've had young people engage in trade, there was no very little when it comes to having explicit provisions for young people when you look at the trade agreement, be it bilateral, preferential, or free trade. And so there's usually, what we noticed was that there was no standard practice. And what you find in most of the trade agreements was that youth considerations or considerations for vulnerable or marginalized groups were quite scattered in the trade agreement. So you find such considerations mostly in sections or chapters relating to education, capacity building, MSMEs, and quite recently, digital trade. And so like youth in trade, when you try to find a definition for vulnerable or marginalized groups, when in terms of trade agreements, the evidence was quite scanty. I think the closest we found was the provision in the East African Common Markets Framework, and they attempt to say that when you look at vulnerable groups in society in terms of trade agreements, they are referring to people who are stigmatized or marginalized on grounds of stigmatization, illness, gender, ethnicity, disability, or age. And so we try to work, at least even though it wasn't, there weren't a lot of evidence for considerations of youth, at least this also gave us a holistic idea, something to work on. It gave a ray of hope that at least there was something as opposed to there being nothing. So we could actually work with this when we try to look at what groups of people fall into the marginalized or like vulnerable groups, of which we have women and youth usually being a part of. So like I said, for youth considerations, you don't really find them explicitly in most of the trade agreements. And so after looking at probably the provisions on education that usually speak to youth or digital trade or small businesses, we also set to look at are there provisions that, even though do not directly speak to young people, that implicitly could be interpreted sort of to suit or like benefit young people. So are there provisions that we could actually extend or stretch its meaning to the benefits of young people? And for that, we look at labor provisions. We have labor provisions in agreements such as the US-Singapore Free Trade Agreement. We have SADC Protocol on Employment and Labor. There's one on Australia-USA Free Trade Agreement. And for small businesses and entrepreneurship, we're looking at, you could find some provisions in the SADC Protocol and the Asian Free Trade Agreement. I'm not going to bore you with the details of what these provisions say. It's all in our research paper, which is like readily available. So you could read, and if later when you have any questions or anything you want to discuss, we will be available. So, so we looked at these, and these were some of the implicit provisions that we thought that by extension, young people could actually benefit from their considerations in some of the free trade agreements. So quite recently, I think another ray of hope for youth considerations in trade agreements has to do with the African Continental Free Trade Area. State parties have proposed a separate protocol on women and youth in trade. And thankfully, once the protocol is concluded and adopted, it's going to bring some sort of fresh perspective, because it's going to be the first time a free trade agreement actually dedicates an entire protocol to issues that concern women and young people in trade.
Thanks, Modesta. One of the areas that we looked at was also about what we can learn from the issue of gender mainstreaming in trade, or addressing women's concerns, because it has been more developed. Can you give just one quick example of what we learned from that?
I actually have two, but okay. So for gender consideration and free trade agreements, we were looking at some best practices that have actually held or had actual real impact. And I was quite excited looking around for Pierre, because during the Women Congress, we had a back and forth, I think, on the impact of free trade agreements, like trade provisions itself, he was quite skeptical on the effectiveness of trade agreements. And so in this research, I was actually quite excited to let him know that, Pierre, we found something. There are actually trade provisions that actually do impact. And so we found, and quite, even though it's quite old, we had the US, the Cambodia-US bilateral agreements on textiles. And so this was a research that was done by Lopez. And so in this research, he looks at the effectiveness of labor provisions in this bilateral free trade agreement, and it was to assess its labor provisions and actually closing the labor gap in Cambodia. And what he realized from the research was the fact that, yes, in actual fact, looking at the duration of this bilateral agreement, the labor provisions in this agreement actually was effective in closing the gender wage gap in Cambodia. And Nadia, let me add another quick one. So another quick one will be considerations from 3 sub-regional agreements in Africa. So we have the COMESA framework, the East African Common Market Agreements, and then the ECOWAS. And so these 3 frameworks, they have provisions on the importance of networks and professional associations for women groups. And what these 3 regional groups have done is to come together and create a platform called the 50 African Women Speak. And with this platform, they bring women as traders, as researchers, like in their various roles in trade together to network. And the African Development Bank actually reports on this project, on its effectiveness. It has actually been able to address the issues that were set out based on this initiative. The African Development Bank actually reports that from this platform, they have a minimum and an average of 9,990 users monthly. And these are women in various roles who are benefiting from their networks from this platform. And so it's one of the very good best practice examples that is actually helping to improve or improve women's participation in trade in their various roles. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Modesta. That's really some great examples of actual evidence that we've been able to see. And so now we can just conclude very quickly with some of our recommendations. And I think you've seen some good examples here of that policies and programs and trade agreements can actually address some of these challenges and include youth in terms of improving youth participation in trade, and having youth more engaged in trade does address some of these market gaps and enhance trade. And of course, we've even seen the gender dimension there as well. So we have several recommendations. I'll just share three here. One is around data. We face the data challenge in our research itself, but we also found it in terms of inclusive policy making, that data is a challenge, and having some of these assessments or other types of ways of gathering data that Regina has talked about, and especially age disaggregated data. It's not usually disaggregated by age. We also suggest having inclusive consultations for policy processes, and now in the new area in trade agreements as well. And finally, several areas around capacity building and technical support. This relates to both addressing the skill gap, it relates to entrepreneurship and some of the policies that Regina talked about in terms of supporting access to finance with capacity building, which has shown success, and then the technical support as well around including youth provisions and trade agreements. So I think I'll stop here. This is kind of the broad scope. There are some more details we haven't shared with you that are actually in the paper. You can scan the QR code here to get the paper. Oh, sorry. You can scan the QR code to access the paper. So we'll just leave this up for 1 second. Okay. And these are our details. If you, but we're around for the rest of the 2 days, so we're happy to discuss more. And then we also wanted to get your views on, if we can move the cursor a little bit. To get your views on where do you think further research is required. And I think we all had different ideas about what that could mean. So you'll see that in the poll. And if you can actually answer it now, maybe, and we'll be able to maybe put the results on the screen if possible. But otherwise we can report to you later what you all said. Okay, so I hope you've all been able to scan it, but it would be great if you could give us your feedback a little bit. Oh, look, we have some responses. So it looks like there's a lot around entrepreneurship and small scale trade, cross-border trade, and then successful policies and participation in networks, which was a particular interest of mine as well. A little bit on youth as employees. And for the other category, we'd be interested to discuss with you further in the rest of the summit on what those areas could be. I'll just give it back to Nadine to close us.
Thank you, Nadia. Thank you guys for listening, and just thought it would be a good chance to give the opportunity to you guys. We want to hear from you all and what you think of our paper. If you weren't able to scan the QR code, you can just find us here today and tomorrow, and we can give you the link. It's on the WTO website now, it's live. And we're also going to be launching a policy paper in the next coming weeks. And so we want to hear from you and what you think is good. It's going to be a more concise and summarized version of this paper in case you're not able to read all 30 pages that we've written. But yeah, thank you guys. Thanks.
Good morning and welcome. My name is Adriana Quiñones. I'm head of Human Rights and Development at UN Women's Office in Geneva. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. We're going to be talking about youth and gender, two of our key topics of work, and in partnership with WTO, we want to make sure that we have a summit that serves as a talent incubator for youth entrepreneurs, negotiators, and that we can move the agenda of development forward in an inclusive way. I would like to welcome our high-level keynote speakers, Ms. Siana Mendez Bertolo, Secretary of State for Trade, the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Tourism of Spain. Welcome. Mr. Xiangzhen Shang, Deputy Director of WTO. Wonderful to have you here with us today. And Diaka Soare, actress, director, and screenwriter and producer. Thank you very much. I would like to give you a few information and latest data on the status of women and girls. UN Women has just published a gender snapshot report. And it's very important that we understand that 60% of girls have completed schooling at the upper secondary level compared to 57% of boys. Increasing women's and girls' educational attainment contributes to women's economic empowerment and more inclusive economic growth. However, we're not seeing those young women in decision-making positions in the negotiations on trade. So there's a gap, definitely, that we need to close. Only 61.4% of prime working age women are in the labor force compared to 90.6% of prime working age men. Besides exclusion from formal schooling, women and girls are disproportionately left out of other chances to build skills. Globally, in 2022, 32.1% of young women aged 15 to 24 were not in education, employment, or training compared to 15.4% of young men. Gaps were largest in Central and Southern Asia, where compared to the rest of the regions around the world. Institutional barriers, including workplace discrimination and unequal division of unpaid care and domestic responsibilities, and an undersupply of decent job opportunities are among the variables disrupting the school-to-work transition for young women. And scholarships and other support for those pursuing higher education and other opportunities to build skills are critical to closing gender gaps. In 53 countries, the law does not mandate equal remuneration for work of equal value. And on the current trajectory, the gap between the time spent by women and men on unpaid care will narrow slightly by 2050, and women will only still be spending 9.5% more time or 2.3 more hours per day on unpaid care work than men. Therefore, investments in care policy, services, jobs, and infrastructure are required to recognize, reduce, and redistribute unpaid care and domestic work. 1 in 5 young women, or 19%, is married before the age of 18, which prevents them from participating in the economy, in decision-making positions, and in public life overall. With that background, we have a wonderful roundtable today. Besides our keynote speakers, we have Brendan Chukeboya, founder and team lead International Trade Law and Policy Research of the Young Africa Policy Research Hub from Nigeria. Navreet Kaur, research scholar of the School of International Studies of the Central University of Gujarat, and former representative of the Gender and Youth Summit from India. Diaka Soare, actress, director, and screenwriter, and Tarini Gupta, member of the WFF Young Scientist Group from India. We will have first our keynote speakers, and then we will pose some key questions to our panelists to start this session. So welcome. I would like to then give the floor to Ms. Siana Mendez Bertolo, Secretary of State for Trade Ministry, Industry, and Trade of Spain. Please, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días a todos. I've been told to speak in Spanish. But good morning, everyone, dear ambassadors and dear Deputy Director General of the WTO and friends. Good morning to everyone. Me gustaría empezar agradeciendo a la OMC la invitación para participar en este primer Youth Summit sobre comercio y sobre género. También agradecer al Centro de Investigación sobre Cuestiones de Género de la OMC, porque es una oportunidad única, yo creo, de reunirnos todos y poder trabajar y compartir experiencias, dificultades, pero sobre todo, como acabas de decir, Adriana, de poder ser esa incubadora de talento que necesitamos, de hombres y de mujeres, pero formados con esta perspectiva de género y formados en el deseo de ese mundo más justo y más igualitario. Como secretaria de Estado de Comercio de España, mi misión es pues, trabajar por la internacionalización de la empresa española, de la economía española en su conjunto. Y en una de las áreas que más ilusión realmente me hace es precisamente trabajar por una mayor participación de la mujer en el comercio exterior, en el comercio y la inversión, en el sector exterior en su conjunto. Si atendemos tan solo a los datos, hay una realidad que nadie puede negar, que no podemos obviar, y es que tan solo el 15% de las empresas, y eso en promedio, internacionalizadas son lideradas o son propiedad de mujeres. Eso nos da una idea del enorme recorrido que aún nos queda por hacer, por caminar juntos para poder alcanzar una plena participación de la mujer en el comercio internacional. Claro, la participación de la mujer en el comercio internacional tiene mucho que ver con la participación de la mujer en general en el mercado de trabajo y en el emprendimiento. En España, el 20% del ecosistema emprendedor está compuesto por empresas, por pequeñas startups lideradas o propiedad de mujeres. Y siendo un porcentaje pequeño en comparación con ese 80% que está liderado por hombres, bueno, pues es una cifra en España que está incluso por encima un poco del promedio de la Unión Europea, que es cerca de un 17%. ¿Y por qué es bueno fomentar la participación de las mujeres en el comercio internacional y en el emprendimiento? Bueno, la primera respuesta es por justicia social, ¿no? Esa es la primera y más obvia, y además es más que suficiente para trabajar por ello. Pero además hay una razón que es económica. Sabemos que las empresas que están internacionalizadas son empresas más productivas, más competitivas, aquellas que reclutan un trabajo más cualificado, que son capaces también de pagar mayores sueldos. Es lo que llamamos la prima de la internacionalización. Son empresas que además son más resilientes y son capaces de adaptarse a un mundo tan cambiante como el que atravesamos actualmente, ¿no? Un mundo especialmente complejo, ¿no? Por su contexto geopolítico también. Por eso, trabajar por la internacionalización de nuestras economías, por economías más abiertas, con empresas capaces de competir en los mercados internacionales y hacerlo además con el deseo, con el propósito de que cada vez más mujeres participen de esas ventajas que ofrece el comercio exterior, pues es un buen objetivo. Por tanto, la igualdad es un imperativo, primero, de justicia social y es además un imperativo económico. En España calculamos, hay un estudio de lo que llamamos Closing Gap, que estima que si fuéramos capaces de integrar totalmente a la mujer en el mercado de trabajo en condiciones igualitarias, completamente igualitarias con los hombres, y si fuéramos capaces, por tanto, de hacer lo mismo también en las empresas que se dedican al sector exterior, podríamos incrementar el PIB en los próximos años hasta un 18%. Yo creo que eso en sí mismo es una llamada realmente a buscar no solo esa justicia, sino esa eficiencia económica que se deriva de la inclusión y de la paridad y de la diversidad también en nuestra economía, que es en sí mismo un activo, un factor de competitividad, por tanto, de crecimiento económico. En la Secretaría de Estado de Comercio, pues nos hemos tomado este objetivo de forma muy seria. Ya en 2019 conformamos un grupo de trabajo que se denomina Mujer e Internacionalización y que es un ejemplo de colaboración público-privada. Dentro de ese grupo de trabajo, de esa plataforma Mujer Internacionalización, están integradas las administraciones públicas, todos los ministerios que tienen algo que ver con la internacionalización, pero también el sector privado, ecosistemas de mujeres emprendedoras, asociaciones de mujeres exportadoras, la banca, por supuesto, financiadores, fundamental, y también la academia. ¿Por qué? Porque pasar de las percepciones a los datos, a la realidad, a la evidencia, es algo también fundamental en esta lucha. Y hemos identificado algunas áreas de trabajo que quisiera mencionar. La primera de ellas tiene que ver con eso, con las estadísticas, con los datos. Ahí hay un compromiso muy fuerte también, desde la Declaración de Buenos Aires de 2017 por la Organización Mundial del Comercio, de perfeccionar las bases de datos y, por tanto, toda la información y la evidencia disponible, no solo para probar este gap, este diferencial entre hombres y mujeres en el comercio, que es evidente, sino también para poder encontrar dónde y por qué están las dificultades. Tenemos que ser capaces, además de integrar estas estadísticas y esa parte de evidencia también en las negociaciones comerciales y ser capaces de medir ex ante y ex post el impacto que nuestros acuerdos comerciales tienen sobre la participación de la mujer en la economía. Eso es algo muy importante y es por eso que la perspectiva de género tiene que formar parte de todas las instituciones que se mueven y que negocian dentro del comercio internacional. Muy importante también visibilidad y redes. Eso es precisamente lo que estáis haciendo aquí hoy. Crear también una red, trabajar en el networking, va a ser una parte muy importante de esta cumbre, de este summit, y hemos comprobado que eso es fundamental. Redes de mujeres y redes mixtas, ¿no? Tenemos que también dialogar entre todos, pero por supuesto generar pues ese diálogo, compartir mejores prácticas, compartir también dificultades, compartir sobre todo experiencias y dar visibilidad a los casos de éxito. Tenemos que saber que se puede llegar, que se puede hacer, que es posible. Y por tanto, dar visibilidad a los casos de éxito, como imagino que harás tú después, es algo también que es fundamental. Y la formación, Adriana, lo mencionabas y eso es algo que impacta en todo, ¿no? Pues cuántas niñas con buena formación y que sin embargo después no tiene un reflejo en el mercado de trabajo, en los puestos directivos, en aquellos sectores que nos preocupa en comercio internacional porque son los sectores más dinámicos, con más perspectivas de crecimiento, aquellos de componente tecnológico también, aquellos que pueden ser más resilientes, los sectores de futuro donde las mujeres, por formación o por cargas familiares también, por una defectuosa conciliación también de la vida personal y de la vida laboral, no se encuentran. Bueno, pues es necesario que la formación acompañe las necesidades de nuestras niñas, de nuestras chicas, de las mujeres, y que podamos tener más mujeres en aquellos sectores que tienen más vocación de internacionalización y que por tanto tienen más perspectivas de futuro. Y por último, y antes mencionaba, las herramientas de financiación y también de formación, ¿no? Pero sobre todo las de financiación, eliminar sesgos conscientes e inconscientes que en el fondo tenemos todos y todas también, sesgos que tienen que ver con la percepción del riesgo que asume una mujer emprendedora, ¿no? Un sesgo autoimpuesto o un sesgo impuesto también, ¿no? Por las organizaciones de financiación. También hay que trabajar con esos sesgos y eliminar esas barreras. Y en este sentido, pues hemos creado en esta plataforma de Mujer Internacionalización en España redes y redes de redes en redes sociales, actividades específicas también para mujeres, y una que quisiera mencionar porque nos ilusiona especialmente y es muy, muy novedosa, que es una actividad que nosotros llamamos Desafía y que consiste en un bootcamp, en una selección de emprendimientos para ser formados en los ecosistemas pues más a la vanguardia a nivel mundial, en los ecosistemas de San Francisco, de Tel Aviv, en fin, y que por primera vez este año hemos sacado en una convocatoria que ha sido 100% para mujeres, buscando participar en rondas de financiación de fondos que están buscando emprendimiento femenino. Así que yo creo que esta actividad que nosotros hacemos todos los años, pero que por primera vez este año hacemos solo para mujeres, va a ser incluso más fructífera que nunca, porque el gap entre lo que están buscando los fondos de inversión y lo que nosotros podemos darle está realmente muy, muy cerca. Nuestro lema es sal, juntas más lejos. Yo creo que además no tenemos que tener complejos en decir que existen desigualdades y que queremos luchar no de forma reactiva, sino proactiva por reducirlas y por tanto, bueno, pues ese debe de ser nuestro objetivo y yo creo que tenemos que tomarlos de forma valiente. Simplemente mencionar 2 áreas de trabajo más. En la multilateral, todo el apoyo a la Organización Mundial del Comercio, el excelente trabajo que estáis haciendo por promover esa conciencia de género y de la perspectiva de género en las negociaciones. Y también a nivel dentro de la Unión Europea, decir que la perspectiva de género también ha cobrado un papel fundamental en nuestras negociaciones, que estamos a punto de firmar el acuerdo entre la Unión Europea y Chile, un acuerdo de asociación que tiene su propio capítulo de perspectiva de género. No es parte del capítulo de comercio y desarrollo sostenible, sino que es un capítulo propio de género, que esperemos que, como hacen otros socios como Canadá, pues se integre de ahora en adelante en todos los acuerdos de libre comercio que vayamos a firmar. Y sin más, bueno, pues muchísimas gracias de nuevo y decir que, en fin, creo que para poder avanzar, en primer lugar, tenemos que ser muy conscientes de esa desigualdad, del sesgo, pero sobre todo estar convencidos de que un mundo igualitario es mejor y además es posible. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias. Y fuera de saludar a la embajadora Aurora Díaz Rato, que nos acompaña hoy acá, agradecer la mirada de España integral en términos de un apoyo a una política exterior feminista, el énfasis en la formación, en la igualdad de salarios. España también lidera la alianza EPIC para la igualdad en los salarios. Mirar los temas de normas sociales y los sesgos que realmente se convierten en obstáculos para las mujeres y para las niñas, pero también fomentar el liderazgo, las redes y las acciones afirmativas. With that, I would like to give the floor now to Mr. Shanghen Zhang, Deputy Director of WTO.
Thank you, Anahina. And it's my honor to join you, Shanna and Jack, for the panel. And as you know, in the WTO, we have a female Director General, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. We have other 2 DDGs, the female DDGs, Angela, and the new one, Johanno. But it's me, the male DDG, is responsible for the trade and gender issue. I'm proud of my responsibility. But as you know, behind me is my team, you know, Anush and her colleague. Anush, please stand up. You know, this is the girl who is the founder of the cross-cutting task force in the WTO, trade and gender. She is still the organizer. So although there's a long way for us to go to embed the trade and gender issue into the multilateral trading system, but we have already achieved a lot. So I also see some male colleagues participate to this event. You are most welcome. And this is the first time for the WTO is organizing such a landmark event involving young people from all over the world. And I'm delighted to see so many young faces at the WTO. Young people have a crucial role to play in shaping nations. No doubt, their future depends on them as they are the building blocks of the country. In September 2015, the United Nations established the Global Plan, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals for transforming our world and funding solutions to worldwide challenges by 2030. The WTO is committed to this agenda 2030, taking part in making it a reality for developing countries. Women are at the center of this plan. Young men and women must also be the central to achieving the 2030 agenda. This is why we are gathered here today. There is an increasing need to have more women in the global economy. The more they are involved, the more economies grow. This is what data is telling us. increasing women's participation in the labor market to the same level as men's would raise many countries' GDP up to 34%. This is the research of the IMF tells us. Trade is a catalyst for women's economic empowerment. Companies that trade employ more women and pay them more than non-exporting or non-importing firms. Women make up 33% of the workforce of export firms, constitutes 36% of the workforce involved in the global value chains and represent 38% of the workforce of foreign-owned firms. This is based on the WTO and World Bank report in 2020. Firms that trade also pay women more because they employ informal jobs with a certain impact on their income level. Trade can also be an agent for business development for women entrepreneurs. It helps them scale up their economic activities and their product range, therefore supporting the diversification of their business and increasing their income. Over the years, the WTO has worked to further strengthen the role of trade in empowering women to assess the impact of international trade on women's economic development, to make trade as inclusive as possible, and thus to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs. Shanna just mentioned in December 2017, 118 WTO members and observers gave their support to the Buenos Aires Declaration on Trade and Women's Economic Empowerment, pledging to work together on bringing down barriers faced by women, preventing them from participating fully in the global economy. By doing so, they gave a strong message that trade has a major role to play in fostering women's economic empowerment. Although the Buenos Aires Declaration is an informal and non-binding instrument, it has created a pathway for WTO members to further and deepen their work on trade and gender, and in September 2020, they created the Informal Working Group on Trade and Gender, which gathered 85% of WTO membership toward achieving the same goal, making trade work for women. WTO members work focus on integrating gender in their trade policies, reviewing research on the topic to better inform their policy making and their free trade agreement negotiations. Working on integrating gender in aid for trade program and understanding how to mainstream gender into the WTO work in a cross-cutting manner. And this work has paved the way to policy changes in many countries. As the WTO upcoming and the latest trade policy monitoring report will highlight, governments have been increasingly including gender equality as part of their development plans and trade policies, recognizing that women's economic empowerment improves poverty reduction and contributes to their development as well as achieving SDG 5 in particular. They are focusing their trade policies on supporting women's entrepreneurs' exports through export promotion program, scheme to access to affordable finance and government procurement markets. They also established dedicated programs to support female farmers by training them on SPS requirements or providing input subsidy for poor female farmers. Lastly, we read from the report that most trade policies promote women's access to employment in export-related sectors. Inclusive trade is at the heart of the WTO's work. Supporting integration of women in international trade is one of its key components. The WTO will therefore continue focusing on women's empowerment as it is an integral part of its work. And I believe that we can only move forward in this goal if we involve young people more in our work. This is what the Youth Trade Summit is all about, to collectively with young women work towards ending all forms of gender discrimination still in place worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this reminder of how everything's linked, ending discrimination, providing opportunities for women and girls as an integral part of achieving the SDGs. And it's wonderful to hear the strong WTO commitment. Thank you very much. With that, I will give the floor to Diaka Soare, actress, director, and screenwriter and producer. Welcome.
Good morning. I'd like to start with a confession. This speech was not written with the help of ChatGPT. I am very happy to be here today. I'm really honored to share the podium with three of you, so thank you. But I would like to start with thanking the person who's invited me to speak today, the powerhouse badass, Anoush Derbogosyan. Thank you. Let's give her a round of applause. So as I started thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, dreadful letters came to mind. GPT. How tempting. The truth is that AI scares me, and I've sometimes started to feel overwhelmed by the velocity of the advancements of our technology. Me, and I'm only in my mid-30s. Not for my agent. If my agent asks, I'm not a day over 19. Thank you. But that feeling made me reflect on our elders and how disconnected some of them must feel. And so by now you're asking, who is this woman on stage and why is she here speaking at the Youth Summit talking about our elders? One of my favorite quotes is from the Sufi poet Hafiz. He writes that fear is the cheapest room in the whole building, and I hope that you don't choose to sleep in it. And it always comes to mind whenever I'm scared, mostly because my favorite room is a 5-star hotel presidential suite. And so when I read last week that women were more skeptical about AI than men and more reluctant to embrace it for so many good reasons, and that it had already created a gender gap, I decided to do what I often do when I get scared, run towards my fear. It just happens that my fear was actually to write today's speech without any help at all. And so as I hear that I am invited to come back next year, I repeat that although this speech was not used with the help of ChatGPT, I just can't promise anything for next year. My name is Diaka Soare, and I'm an actress. I'm also a screenwriter, director, producer, and I call it Something's Gotta Give. I was born and raised in Paris from a French mother from Bourgogne and a West African Guinean father. My mother worked in fashion. My father was an actor and screenwriter. He told me to do what he said and not what he did. And so as a rebellious and radical mixed-race young woman, I did the opposite. I started classical theater at 6, dance at 10, singing at 15, moving on to musical theater, performing in many theaters. I moved to California to study acting and perform, came back to Paris where I wrote a play for myself and another actress that we toured for 3 years, ended up in Hong Kong where I decided to stay, danced in casinos, oh yes, developed my jazz singing before I moved to New York with a visa from Broadway Dance Center, performed off-Broadway, got the opportunity to bring coffee for the CEO of a big movie production company, ended up their head of development in 3 years' time, taught myself how to direct a night, to use the equipment that they had laying around, resigned, started working and directing short films and videos, went back to the love of my life, acting. I moved to LA for 3 years before I came back home to New York, finally able to develop my own projects and raise money to put together short-form productions and turn them into feature-length movies where I am always the star. Now, I do not have enough time to list all the challenges along the way. The sexism, the racism, the abuse, the erosion or erasure of my rights as a woman of color in some of the countries, cities, buildings, meetings, or dark rooms along the road. What I know is that I was always focused. My desire to live my life as a thespian greater than anything else. I just knew that it would make me happy. And I knew it would prompt wonderful opportunities to fight against some of the inequalities and injustices that made me roar inside. In most film and TV, women and women of color are not only underrepresented, they are also inaccurately represented. My work is to create content that pushes the needle and focus on the quality and context of representation. My diasporic identity, the world I live in, my vision for the future of African narratives are incredibly diverse, with a razor-sharp focus and a unique perspective constantly expanding. And I would like to thank everyone in this room because I use data and the studies and research that you put together to create decks and extort money from the executives that have no artistic fiber and don't know how to finance the good projects. And so as I reflected on past times, I realized how much razor-sharp focus matters. I remember my focus at one point in my life being on how to find enough money to hop on a train to go to Cannes Film Festival to meet Bruce Willis. I was obsessed with Bruce Willis, his movies, his swag, his repartee. All my life, all my friends and I thought that I was in love with Bruce Willis. But then one day I realized I was not in love with Bruce Willis. I wanted to be Bruce Willis. But the heroes of the films that I'd grown up watching never looked like me. I realized very early on that I didn't exist on that screen. To this day, I still don't. But again, you know, I'm complex, smart, observant, well-read, vibrant, dizzyingly funny. I have lots of personality. I have edge. I bring context and nuance. I am a woman. I used to consider myself the killjoy in chief, speaking out at events, meetings, dinners, or parties about gender inequalities, blatant misogyny in my industry, how it feels to walk the streets of this world knowing you're considered the second sex and that you will be paid accordingly, no matter the value or the quality of the work that you deliver. But not anymore. I am so proud to be part of a community that rejects the old structures of gender and power, that works to shape new ones and to create new dialogues around gender politics. That community, which you are part of, the work that you do has changed my life. I am a very proud member of New York Women in Film and TV, Women in Film Los Angeles, Marble Collective, Cine Nomade Guinée. And every week I try connecting women that I think should meet, which also makes me the proud member of 3,019 WhatsApp groups. It took time, life experiences, and a whole reckoning of the film industry to give myself permission to be the star of my own film. And so I challenge us all to be the star of our own films. In our support to youth, young women and men, and if we are part of this crazy world that gives and takes, what do we do on a daily basis? What do we do on a weekly basis for a greater good? Where is our razor-sharp focus? Which risks do we take? How do we dare? Let's be the razor-focused person who thinks before they spend. That's a big one. I'll repeat it. Think before they spend. Let's be the person who takes a stand for its own and for the one that looks like anything but them. Focus triggers courage, and courage is not only super trendy, it's very attractive. Take my word for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's wonderful to get your invitation for our next segment of this event, where we will hear from different experiences. We have one of the speakers connected online. And I thank this panel and invite the following speakers, Brendan Chukebwa, Naprit Kaur, Tahini Gupta, and Yaka, that will stay with us. So the invitation, as you heard, is for razor sharp focus and to be the stars. So with that, we continue the panel today. I think we're ready to begin now. Welcome to a wonderful panel from different regions around the world, and where we will discuss different aspects of gender, youth, and trade. I welcome Brendan Chukebwa, founder and team lead of International Trade Law and Policy Research of the Young Africa Policy Research Hub. Naprit Kaur, research scholar, School of International Studies of Central University of Gujarat. Tiaka Sware, actress, director, and screenwriter, and Tarini Gupta, member of the WFF Young Scientists from India. I will ask 3 questions to the panelists. And the first question is, what is the biggest challenge for young women today? And in your opinion, how could young women fully benefit from trade and trade outcomes? Each of you has 2 minutes. Let's begin with Brendan.
Okay, thank you for that question. I'm noticeably excited to be part of this platform. I think today is he for she, and I'm glad to be here. And I must appreciate quickly Anosh for the invitation. With regard to your question, I want to look at it from different perspectives. I understand that young men and women may have similar challenge when it comes to access to finance and other similar challenges that face all genders. But with regard to women, I think that the biggest challenge that women face is the issue of gender discrimination. By this, I mean that young women are denied opportunities by virtue of the fact that they are female gender. And this is evidenced in the recent report of the World Economic Forum report on Global Gender Gap 2023, which shows that it's not an African problem, but it cuts across the whole world. For example, that report shows that in the area of economic participation, that women are denied opportunities, economic participation, leadership, decision-making as well. In fact, with regards to economic participation, it will take the 146 countries analyzed, it will take 162 years for the world to cover the gender gap in the area of economic participation. The same thing goes to education, though the world is making progress as regards to participation of women in education. So that report showed us that it will also take the world 16 years to cover that gender gap. And this is what I think is the basic challenge, that apart from the fact that I'm a male gender, I have never had that kind of discrimination where I'm denied opportunity by virtue of the fact that I'm a man. No, but this is what I think is the biggest challenge of a woman. And to address this concern, it calls for collective advocacy against such discrimination. This cannot be achieved by women speaking for women. I think it's time for men to also speak on behalf of women. And this is the best collective approach. We need to engage from the family level to the global level. Most of these challenges manifest, for example, I'm from Africa, it manifests from the family level, where parents begin to give different impression, teach their children, okay, this is a career path you have to follow. For example, in some African families, they will ask you, okay, you are a female. This is the area that you have to go into, nursing field. You have to take courses in pharmacy because that aligns with the role, domestic responsibility of a woman. In fact, as a matter of fact, there is this saying that the achievement of an African woman is to the extent she takes care of the children and also the husband. So this starts from the family level. So we must start our advocacy sensitization from the family level, try to sensitize them that this is not the best notion. You must give everyone equal opportunities. And it must be based on three principles. One, in the area of economic contribution of women. In 2019, World Bank report shows that 37% of the world GDP came from women. So if women could contribute to the global GDP, why wouldn't us give them that opportunity also to participate in trade? And also morality shows that we are female. If you have a female child and also a male child, why should you deny them the opportunity to express, to support them in any area of course or discipline that they have chosen? And in the area of legality, I also say that it is also a human rights violation to discriminate women on the ground of gender. And that I think that we should base our advocacy on these three principles. And that's my response to that question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nafit.
A very good morning, and thank you so much for inviting me, Ms. Anush. So as a woman, I think the biggest challenge we face is the mindset of the society, that the society will live. They think that women is inferior to men, and it's not in the minds of men only, it's also in the minds of we as a women. We think that we are inferior. A very good morning to all of you, and namaste from India. Sorry, I have to start it again. So as a young woman, I feel like the biggest challenge we face is the mindset of the society, is what society feels. Society thinks that women is inferior to men. I don't think it's not for all countries, but yeah, what I believe, what I have faced. Even as a woman, we think that we are inferior to women physically or mentally. But it is not true. As we all are here, very empowered women, we are sitting here. It's not true. So the biggest challenge, we have to change the mindset of society, because this is what leads to the other issues, that is unequal pay, lack of women-friendly infrastructures in companies, and not inclusive decision-making processes, or the women representation in every sectors. So the main issue is the mindset of society, which leads to other issues. If we change the mindset of society, and this will start, like Brendan said, this will have to be start from our family, from ourselves first. When we start appreciating the power of women and how we can represent ourselves, then only the world will help us to grow, will help us to include in decision making. So, and I think that trade can remove these challenges, because with the trade, women can have equal pays, women can have equal wages, women can reduce the trade can reduce the trade can increase the women development, economic development. And with the women economic development, women can feel empowered and go beyond the boundaries, the barriers which is made in our minds, which is made by the societies. We can pass those barriers, and with the knowledge and trade and inclusive decision making, we can come forward as a young we all are young scholars here, so we can come forward to uh, help overcome all the barriers. And with the trade, women can get skill training, which will help. With the trade, the women can help skill training and proper knowledge, which will help to reduce all the barriers in the society. And as trade increases global competition, and this leads a country to increase more workforce. And with the increased workforce, we can the countries involve more women in their businesses and in their trades. So this helps women to involve more in trades. And with the more involvement, women can be added in development and inclusive decision making. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We continue with Diak in the room.
Thank you. I have to piggyback of what Nafri just said. It's really, I think it really starts with changing the mind of our society, obviously. And I think that if we start there, the beginning is to show our youth that it is possible. And so as I work with visual and mediums, I think that it's important that the representation increases, obviously. So I would say that, speaking from where I stand in my industry, the representation of women in film, TV, and media is still really far from perfect or for even good. In front of and behind the camera, there are several studies and researches that I base a lot of my decks on, like the UCLA or Variety report, the Gina Davis Institute is also a wonderful research. And when you look at the number of females or women represented or inaccurately represented, with the multicultural and the Asian community being at the very bottom, then we are facing still some huge challenges. Obviously, financial support is huge as well. Again, speaking from where I stand, the content that not only I, but my collaborators and people I work with that are creators create is quite unbelievable. And everything that we miss in order to push it out to the world are means and resources. So you see when when a woman is at the helm of something, it just meets more challenges to actually come into fruition. Thank you.
Thank you. And now online, we will hear from Tarini. Tarini, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you so much for letting me tune in virtually. It's a pleasure to meet you all. So I'll lend my perspective as a young scientist and also as a public health and nutrition researcher. So I think for young women to fully benefit from trade and its outcomes, it's essential to address the determinants of health that impact the extent to which women can actually engage in trade. So women, especially in lower resourced countries, experience limited access to healthcare, sexual and reproductive health services, and experience high rates of food insecurity. And as we all know, poor health outcomes, mental well-being, and nutritional outcomes are very closely associated with higher dropout rates from school and also the workforce. And eventually these limit women's ability to participate in trade. Secondly, as we discussed earlier in this session, technology and innovation are very central to entrepreneurship and trade as a whole. However, women are still less likely to receive the benefits of these technologies, and this perpetuates gender imbalances in trade, and this is a big problem. I also think that, as we discussed, that young women do constitute a large proportion of the labor workforce, but contrastingly have very few leadership positions, especially in South Asia, where I'm from. So a lack of these structured leadership paths and enabling environments for women are significant barriers to taking up decision-making positions within the trade industry. That being said, it is important to note that, we need to focus on increasing women's engagement in these higher skilled areas of trades for them to fully benefit from being in this industry. And also we need to supplement these employment positions with social protection plans, equal pay, benefits, and paid parental leave for them to have a great experience and equal experience in this field. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to start getting the context of the obstacles, the barriers, but also how trade can support. The second question is, what needs to be done in support of young women's engagement in trade? Each of you has 2 minutes, and maybe we can start with Tarini.
Absolutely. So I would say that, one is engage women in entrepreneurship that enables them to participate specifically at these higher and more prolific levels of trade, provide access through, sustainable loans, as well as educational and mentorship opportunities. And obviously try to have women lead these trainings. I would also say that, interventions to address barriers to trade should operate at multiple levels. So one is at the environmental restructuring level, address workplace corruption and harassment through sexual and gender-based violence trainings. At the policy level, implement gender-sensitive trade policies and regulations that promote inclusivity and also reduce these barriers for women entrepreneurs. It is also very limiting that women are primarily involved in these upstream and lower productivity areas and less secure areas in trade, and overcoming this requires the creation of systematic frameworks to identify these gaps in the trade workforce and establish a pipeline for women to enter these areas and these positions. And I think this comes with, starting training women at a really young age to take up positions in STEM, especially in low and less developed regions in the world, and also focusing on capacity building as opposed to just transferring these skills. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We heard you loud and clear. Let's continue with Diaka.
Thank you for this question. I think accountability for companies and brands is paramount. After the murder of George Floyd, we had companies and brands coming out with call to actions, taking action to bring diversity to their boards. And if we look back, a lot of them have not really delivered on their promises. I really believe that accountability can bring some change, and that includes diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that have really just started, and we don't have a lot of visibility in terms of those DEI programs and how they work and what they have created so far. But they have created visibility, they have created hope, and they have created some concrete results. I think we also need to monitor them and try to get some funding to be able to pay close attention to their results in a very good amount of time, so that we can make it the best that make them the best that they can be.
Naprit?
I believe that to engage young women in trade is to by teaching them trade and adding curriculum in our education system. It should be added from the secondary level, not only in higher level. From the secondary level, the trade and business should be teach to young women, not only women, men also. But with that, we can encourage more young women to enter into trade and businesses. And one issue which I think that as per the estimates, there are only 15% women which are engaged in, which have their own businesses. The main reason behind which I believe that why women doesn't go in trade and businesses is the lack of financial support. So to engage more women, more young women in the trade and business sector, we should provide them financial support, and should add there should be a policy about the financial support for them. There should be loans to start a business. So that's when women entrepreneurs will come, more women entrepreneurs will come. And one more thing which we can add is the menstrual leave. A lot of organizations is still talking about menstrual leave. If we add this, because we all know as a woman we menstruate per month, every month, and we have issues, we cannot work in that distraction. So there should be menstrual leave introduced in sectors by WTO or by any organization, which can be implemented by other countries. It will help young women to come more in these sectors. And there should be a women friendly infrastructures. When there are women friendly infrastructures in companies and businesses, then only young women will get engaged in those businesses and trades. And one more thing which is very crucial these days is the complaint redressal mechanism. There should be a proper and better complaint redressal mechanism in every businesses, so that young women get encouraged to come in those trades and business sectors. Because women feel, most of women doesn't feel safe in developing and underdeveloped countries. They doesn't feel safe going to business in men dominated society. So there should be a complaint redressal mechanism which helps them to overcome all the issues. So that's how we can engage more women, in more young women in our trade and business. Thank you.
Brendan, please.
Okay, thank you. When it comes to how to support women, I suggest that it requires both policy and institutional intervention. Well, by institution, I mean that from the local level to the global level. At the local level, you see trade associations like chambers of commerce. In the state, you have Ministry of Trade. Global regional, you see we have regional economic communities, and you have also WTO. So they have major role to play in this regard. You know, in our last webinar we had at the Young African Policy Research Hub, I noticed that poor awareness of young women about trade. Trade is not just limited to trade in goods, where that requires export and import. We also have another aspect of it, that trade in services, digital trade, and the even intellectual property component of it. So it calls for institutional intervention, institutional support, come up with sensitization on what trade is all about. If you express interest as a young woman that you want to go into export, you want to export to Nigeria, you want to import, then there should be this institution which I've identified should be able to assist them, providing them with the information needed in the area of what goods are even tradable, what registration document do you need to do, intellectual aspect of it, the packaging requirements, even digital marketing. See, these are areas that requires institutional support, and women need it, because without information, trade is knowledge-based and information-driven. you can't even do anything. So we must start from that area. Then as regards to policy aspect of it, I would suggest that based on my review of existing policies, I discovered that there are a lot of policy interventions, like when it comes to procurement measures in the area of procurement, there's need for increment in women quota for bidding of contracts, tendering of contracts with government. So I hardly see young women getting a contract from government institution. It's really male dominated. So we must start from increasing that quota. Okay, say if you give, why not this year to support our women in SMEs? Let any contract that has to do with supply of products, maybe toilet in schools and services, should be women-based. That is a practical measure that we can use to enhance the women participation in trade. So these are both political policies and institutional intervention that require to support women in trade from my own perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for the last question, very importantly, how do you see the role of the WTO in supporting young women? So let's start with Naprit.
Being the prominent organization, international organization, WTO can have an impact on every country, even if it's underdeveloped, developing, or developed country. WTO, any policy made by WTO will have impact to other countries. So what I believe is what WTO can do, or what I suggest, is to undergo a comparative research of the gender issues we face, because every country have a different issues. Like I have a friend in Afghanistan. Even if with the internal disturbances going on there, she and her mother is running their small business from their home, even if with all the internal disturbances. And it is just one example. She told me about other women who are working from their home. They are making clothes and selling it online. They are making clothes and selling, and their husbands and men of their family are selling they are selling in society, and they're selling in shops. So if the women in Afghanistan, even in all those disturbances, can do trade, so every woman have in every country can do. So what WTO can do is to hire or engage some women from every country to check the issues what they have to, and then segregate those issues in different parts, and then work upon them, because every country needs different kind of policies. So there should be policies according to the needs of the country. So comparative research is the main thing we can do. And other than that, what WTO can make have a role in women, supporting women, is they can have a brainstorming session, because young minds have a lot of ideas, have a lot of business ideas, but the issue they face is the financial funding. So WTO can have a brainstorming session like this, and get their ideas, and if they found it good or better, so they can provide funding. They can help to get their funding, because if WTO can help any women to fund, that business will surely go on. So I think this is the main role WTO can play. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let's hear from you, Tarini.
Yes, thank you so much. So I have three main takeaways or recommendations. One is that WTO should do more to support developing countries in fully participating in the global trading system. And what this means is like focusing more on capacity building, as opposed to, like the funding and finance mechanisms that can perpetuate these power imbalances between lesser developed regions and more developed regions, so to speak. Second is, as Navpreet mentioned, that women in different countries have extremely different barriers to trade. I'm working in the field of implementation science, which basically uses frameworks to identify different barriers and facilitators to different behaviors. And this could be used to really identify why barriers to trade in specific countries and also regions to enable more targeted policies and also interventions. And third is we really need more linkages between trade enablement and also health-related sustainable development goals of ending hunger. We cannot be working in silos. We need to advocate for paid parental leave, paid menstrual leave, breastfeeding support, as these are all prerequisites for creating safe work environments and healthy employees. We need work at the policy level. We cannot work in silos. So more work with civil society, women's health NGOs and organizations, and youth advocacy groups to create these enabling spaces for women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tarini. Brendan.
Okay. First of all, I must appreciate the efforts and an initiative of the WTO so far globally. They have been making impact, especially with some initiatives like even Gender Research Hub, which is a knowledge-based unit that shares information as regards to gender, which is very important because information is very important so that also understand the scope of gender and all that. And also you see the future of trade and their support to developing countries, building the capacity of developing countries in the area of trade, and also see a lot of agreements, even the fishery agreements recently emerged from the MC12 and the public forum, a lot of even the recent informal group. These are space, that it seeks to accommodate NGOs and some other organizations to make input. But the area where I'm not very much comfortable with the work of WTO is the operational nature of WTO. WTO is structured in such a way that it operates at a country level. By this, I mean that non-state parties hardly have a say. In fact, if they do, they have limited state. By non-state parties, I mean like individual NGOs, they have a limited space to make their contribution. And if you see the way it is structured, most of the things that happen at the WTO goes at the country level. So those in rural areas don't even understand. And this is where the problem lies. For example, the informal sector in Africa, I see that women constitute the informal sector, and these people, they don't even have registered business. Their voices are not heard. If I trace statistics, I doubt if they capture their needs and all that. So it becomes an issue of urgency that there's need for integration of non-stakeholders like NGO in WTO's engagement in two areas. One is in the area of needs assessment. You see, there's no way you can understand the needs of even women traders at the WTO level. It's at the rural level. So, and I believe that we have a lot of NGO, like my own organization, we have, contacts with people in the rural areas that you can even engage young people as enumerators to understand their peculiar challenges. Is what, apart from, desk review, you can do field research, goes to some places, it's not necessarily you engage the state parties, but you see an independent agency that also seeks to support WTO in this area. Then another thing again is in the terms of the work of WTO, they will say in law that you cannot be a judge in your own case. So in assessment of the work of WTOs too, it is important that to engage independent researchers. You have, this issue of Gender Research Hub, what impact is it making? This opinion, you can't provide a fair opinion, you can't get a fair opinion from maybe possibly a contracting party like countries that are working together. So, but if you engage non-stakeholders like NGOs, they'll be able to give you, because they don't have they just have a neutral interest. They will report to you the way it is. So that is the area that WTO needs to focus. Like even this coming MC13 that'll be held in Abu Dhabi, I think it is important that we create more space for non-stakeholders, non-stake parties also to be part of this initiative. By so doing, we have a kind of collective effort addressing global trade issues. That's my contribution to that. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Yasa, please.
So this is not my area of expertise, but I think that I'm here thanks to WTO and to I think outside the box sometimes and opening to industries. Because if I'm here to inspire, engage, create change, conversations, or collaborate, you sometimes never know in which person this is going to materialize, and each industry is so specific. So much details and thought and attention that needs to be inserted in each of them. So I speak from my experience that a lot of my issues are gatekeepers, and I know who they are, and I have to manage around them, and that is one of the things that I think in sometimes big organization you have that could create issues. A second point that I want to make is maybe because I'm from Guinea and a lot of my family is there, and a lot of women in my family struggle putting things together. They are entrepreneurs, they have the business skills of the Godfather. It's really crazy, but the access that they lack is really dreadful. It's heartbreaking. And I think that investing in the African youth, and when we see the numbers and African women, obviously I would be remiss if I wasn't mentioning that this point. And the last point is, yeah, bring more men into the conversation. I think women's empowerment include all genders. Thank you.
Well, we have heard so many important issues, from the structural, the need to address gender-based discrimination, to shift our mindset and look at the issues of access, including access to finance, to markets, looking at the issues of addressing violence against women as a key obstacle for women in entrepreneurship, for women in trade, to position women in value chains. The accountability for companies and brands, the importance of adding to the curriculum from a very early age, topics on entrepreneurship, on trade, menstrual leave as an integral part of a safe place to work, complaints mechanisms, affirmative action. And that reminds me of a program that we have at UN Women on gender-based procurement, to make sure that women have access to those calls, to those bids that sometimes look just like a black box and women do not know how to access. And looking at the context of each country, we cannot really address the obstacles without looking at the realities of each country. Making sure that capacity development is linked to policies and trade enablement, and ensuring that we have an inclusive perspective of all actors in these conversations. So to me, we have a very good agenda, a very strategic one moving forward. I thank Anush and her team for this wonderful opportunity to start this dialogue, and looking forward to seeing what we can accomplish together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adriana, Brendan, Nafprit, and Jaka for this very interesting conversation. We are actually on time, which is probably the first time ever. And we have our next session in 15 minutes at 11:30. We will have 5 WTO ambassadors that will be interacting with all of you. And I would like to invite you to move to the next session in the council room. So it's the building, you have to go out. Hopefully we won't be soaked by rain. We have to go out, and it's the building on your right side, this big building with in glass. And you will see, you will have some guidance along the way. So we'll see you there in 15 minutes sharp. Thank you very much.